Good evening. I'm John Miko, the Executive Director of the Union League Legacy Foundation, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's Civil War Roundtable. The Legacy Foundation is inspired by the United States Constitution and the history, the spirits, and the values of the Union League of Philadelphia. Our mission is to create more involved, better educated citizen leaders. We do this through a host of programs like tonight's Civil War Roundtable, through scholarships to deserving young future leaders, through the care of our great collection at the Union League, and through Good Citizen Day. In fact, next week we will start what is a two-week process of having our 75th annual Good Citizen Day, where we provide civics education to about 300 high school juniors. All of this is made possible through the generosity of our many donors and growing number of donors. I'm very pleased to report. If you've not made your gift yet to the Legacy Foundation, our fiscal year is June 30th, and we hope you will be able to join the many, many other members and others who support all that we do at the Legacy Foundation. Tonight's program will be about an hour long, and towards the end of the program, Charlie Zahm, our performer, will take some questions. So you can ask questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And now to introduce our program is the historian for the Legacy Foundation, Mr. Jim Mundy. Jim.
John, thank you very much. And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another, this will be a rollicking episode of the Civil War Roundtable program if we ever had one. So Charlie's a great musician. I've known him for about 20 years now, and he is the master of Civil War music in the Philadelphia area. So I think you're in for a real treat. And when I say that, not because it's about the Scottish Highlanders or stuff like that, and being a little Scottish myself, but it's just great music. So let me get on with the presentation. So the March of the Cameron Men, a tribute to the 79th New York Highlanders, is a one-man show following this gallant Scottish-American regiment through some of the most grueling campaigns of the Union effort in the American Civil War. Folk singer, multi-instrumentalist, and historian Charlie Zahm assumes the persona of Captain Joseph Lang through the regiment's 3-year enlistment. All of the songs and poems in the presentation are from the period and have been collected by Charlie for this presentation, except for one that Charlie wrote called Our Mother's Sons, about two Scots brothers who fought against each other at the Battle of Stantilly. And that was a very common theme in the Civil War itself. So ladies and gentlemen, it is truly my great honor and pleasure, without much ado, as Charlie wrote, to introduce Charlie Zahm and the March of the Cameron Men.
This man of the Cameron flag follows in the field. Scores the ball on the diamond side of the Cameron field. I hear the pibroch sounding over the mountains and glen. While riding the footsteps are tramping with me, it's the march of the Cameron Men. 'Tis the march, 'tis the march, 'tis the march of the Cameron Men. 'Tis the march, 'tis the march, 'tis the march of the Cameron Men. The moon is arisen, it shines on the path not trod by the gallant and true. I fire the hopes for the chief in the city, whatever and dare they can do. I hear the pibroch sounding over the mountains and glen. While lightly the footsteps are tramping the heat, it's the march of the Cameron Men. 'Tis the march, 'tis the march, 'tis the march of the Cameron Men. 'Tis the march, 'tis the march, 'tis the march of the Cameron Men. Though bravely they march, each Cameron knows he may tread on the head no more. But bravely he'll follow his chief in the field, his gather his laurels before. I hear the pibroch sounding over the mountains and glen. Oh, I lightning the footsteps are tramping the heat. It's the march of the Cameron Men. 'Tis the march, 'tis the march, 'tis the march of the Cameron Men. 'Tis the march, 'tis the march, 'tis the march of the Cameron Men. 'Tis the march, 'tis the march, 'tis the march of the Cameron Men. 'Tis the march, 'tis the march, 'tis the march of the Cameron Men.
Oh, hello, everybody. It's good to see you here. Thank you so much for letting me be part of your evening. this evening, and thank you very much to Mr. Monday and everybody from the Union League Legacy Foundation. Allow me to introduce myself. The name's Lang, Joseph Lang, and it's a joy to be with you across all the years and across all the distance to be with you tonight to tell you a little bit about the American Civil War. Now, I think that everybody who's on this call today has an interest in the great American Civil War that took place between 1861 and 65. Well, I'm just the man to tell you a little bit about my part of it, because after all, I served with the 79th New York Highlanders. But I have to start from the beginning, don't I? In the next little while, I want you to understand, if you're singing along, I'd love to hear you sing. And if you just want to hear a good story or two, well, I've got some of those for you as well. But I've got to start from the very beginning. The beginning, for me, starts in 1828. I was born in Scotland, a town just west of Glasgow in the west of Scotland called Paisley, which is a very industrial area. I'm not sure if you've been there before, but in my day, they were very well known for needles and pins and thread, and they probably produced more than any other city in the world of needles and thread. And I was born very much into a neighborhood that was destined for greatness, but there's only so much you can do in a wee town like Paisley, just outside of Glasgow. If you're an enterprising young man, like I was, you're looking for a bigger opportunity. And as I was not the firstborn son, I was not going to inherit a whole lot of money or land, I decided to come to Manhattan in New York City. So I did in 1845. 5 years later, I had my own print shop set up. I was apprenticed and learned how to do the fine trade of printing and engraving work. By the time I was an old man, passed away in the early 1900s, I made quite a bit of money from that. But for me, if you want to hear my story, I think I've got to start in the 1850s. Understand, when you came over in the mid-19th century, especially if you're from Scotland, you wanted to meet as many people as you could possibly meet, and you wanted to grow your enterprises and your connections. In the 1850s, there was no better way to do that in the United States, in almost any state in the Union, than by joining a militia. The rage militaire was everything. And you joined it was pretty much a fraternity. Men like yourself, you had to buy your own uniform, you bought your own sword, you learned how to take orders, you learned how to give orders, you learned how to march, you learned how to stand at attention. You had to do all those soldierly things. What we were trained to do mostly was to protect New York City from any foreign invaders. Well, we did everything that a good regiment could do. 79th took our number from the Queen's own Cameron Highlanders, the 79th, back in Great Britain, where I was from. And we expected one day maybe we'd be called to protect New York City. Little did we understand that in April of the year 1861, the South would be firing upon a Union, what was to become a Union fort, and that changed everything. We were ready to protect New York City, but we had no idea that we'd be protecting it from our own countrymen, the rebels from the South. Over the 3 years in which the 79th served, we had over 1,300 men coming in and out of our ranks. At the end of it, only 130 of us came back home. And this is the story of the 79th. We are the most well-traveled regiment, nearly all of them. We buried our dead in 7 different states. We served in various brigades, various armies, but we always had one thing in mind, and that was to protect the Union. For after 4 years of bloody war, it took the blood-soaked thread of an entire generation to sew the fabric of this great nation once again. Let me tell you a little bit about the 79th, though, before I get into the blood and guts of the American Civil War. I'm actually wearing a uniform. I wish you could see me now, but I'm wearing a uniform that was originally a militia uniform. And it's based on the heel and cut of the jacket here, if you can see it. And the top and trews that I'm wearing is actually the Cameron of Iraq top. I'm not sure you can see that. If I were with you in person, you could see it. A heel and cut uniform, and you've got the beautiful piping along the sides. And I'm wearing a captain's designation here. After all, I mustered in as the captain of Company G. Now, when Uncle Abe called for 75,000 volunteers, the regiment, the militia, I should say, was less than 400 men. We had to get up to regimental strength, and it took a little bit of time to do that. By the time we were up to 900 men, and we were marching down Broadway on May 29th of 1861, we knew that we had one thing to do, and that was to bring this war to a close as quickly as possible. We signed up for 3 years, while some of our compatriots signed up for 3 months. We thought it would be over in 3 months. We had no idea the kind of maelstrom of lead and fire we'd be getting into. Now, understand, we had so many battles to fight through: Roanoke Island, Newburn, Camden, Wilmington Island, James Island, Manassas, Chantilly, South Mountain, Fredericksburg, Vicksburg, Jackson, Strawberry Plains, Wilderness, Spotsylvania. When we were marching down Broadway, May 29th, we had no idea that was our destiny. But nevertheless, we signed up for 3 years of service, and we are not going to let any rebels get in the way of holding this union together. You might have heard of the old Robert Burns song, Scots Wha Hae. The words were changed for the 79th, and this is our song. Sons of freedom, now arise. Let your hands up in the skies. Shout, we will not lose the prize of union and rise. The rebels who are like Aspen are just a foreign surge. Our union can be overturned by serenade. No, we will not yield the right, for it we will boldly fight. Shout, we will not lose the right, for victory or death. The rebels who are like Aspen are just a foreign surge. Our union can be overturned by the serenade. See your brothers bravely low, by the cold assassin's blow, but rising to battle go, for victory or death. Rebels who are like Aspen are just a foreign surge. Our union can be overturned by the serenade. They settle the waters low, make them to your ringer bow. Laurels and will round your brow, and heaven not bruise. Rebels who are like Aspen are just a foreign surge. Our union can be overturned by day. Lay the southern waters low, take them to your ringer bow. Laurel and shout round your brow, and heaven and we made our way to Washington, D.C. We are itching for a fight. After all, you've got nearly 900 men of Scots or Scottish extraction, all of whom were sponsored by the Caledonian Society of New York or the St. Andrew's Society of New York. And we knew that it wasn't just our commanders who were watching us. It was the Scottish American community, not only from New York City, but from all over the country. We had the reputation to live up to. After all, the Scots were born fighting, it's been said. When the Romans came west and they took over what was to later become England, they set their eyes north and they marched until they met these various painted tribes. They called them the Caledonii. Well, they called the land of the Caledonii Caledonia. And while the Romans won a battle or two, they never won over the Scots. They never established a permanent place there because the Scots would not let them have one moment's peace. We were born fighting, and we would bring that fighting spirit to the south, to these rebels who threatened to tear apart the great union of this country. I didn't emigrate all the way from Paisley to be part of a country that was broken in two. So I and others in my regiment were more than willing to fight and answer Uncle Abe. Well, we got our first opportunity, July 21st, 1861, didn't we? It was a place called Manassas or Bull Run. There are actually two Bull Runs. This is the first of the two. I fought at both of them. In the particular first Bull Run, we didn't quite understand the way the rebels fought, and we, ourselves, Northerners, didn't understand the terrain, and our generals perhaps were outgeneraled in some cases. Our particular colonel was for the regiment in which, for the brigade in which I was brought together, was the 13th and the 13th New York and the 21st New York, and also the 69th. The 69th, by the way, I knew many men of the 69th volunteers. They were all Irish, all Fenians. You don't turn your back on them, but you want them fighting on your side, if you know what I'm saying. If there's any Irish among this group tonight, as I'm looking into this wee lightning box, you know what I'm talking about. Well, Colonel William Tecumseh Sherman fed us over the hill of Henry House bit by bit. 3 different times we tried to take that hill. 3 different times we were repulsed. Our commanding officer was James Cameron, the brother of the Secretary of War, Simon Cameron. He actually died in the second volley. What could have been a good retreat turned out to be an absolute rout. And the 79th and the 69th acted as rear guard as we made our way back to Washington, D.C. to lick our wounds. I was wounded 4 times, actually, once in the left forearm and also in the right side of my head and in the neck. I never actually got all of my hearing back. And because I was so gravely wounded, they sent me to New York City to recover. It was August 14th when I read in the newspapers that the 79th, along with a couple of other regiments, and I've got to say this because it's part of the 79th story, actually mutinied. But I've got to give you the background as to why this mutiny happened, in case you've actually heard of it before. Understand that after our commanding officer, Cameron, was killed, the Scots thought we could elect our own new colonel again. That was not allowed. The men who had the 3 months service, they all went home. The 79th was promised a furlough, and that was promptly cancelled. You mix all that, and the fact that we couldn't return home at all, with a little bit of Scots whiskey and a bunch of angry, wounded, disgruntled men, and what you've got on your hands is a mutiny. Well, McClellan understood what he had, and he knew he had to put it down immediately. Colonel Isaac Ingalls Stevens was the new commander of the regiment. And as the regiment refused to attack any orders, McClellan surrounded the regiment. So I read and so I was told, as I was not part of it. And had I been part of it, I would have put a stop to it immediately. But he surrounded it with regular army, not volunteers, regular army and artillery and horse. And they were aiming their muskets and their rifles right into the 79th. And they threatened to shoot, to kill, if the 79th did not stand down and put down this mutiny, rebellion, once and for all. Stevens said, I am your colonel. Your duty is to me. You are soldiers. Your duty is to obey. The 79th understood they was totally surrounded. And in fact, their weapons were actually stacked. They couldn't even fight back if they wanted to. And the mutiny was put down. The reason I bring up this rather ugly chapter of the 79th is that for the next 2.5 years, the regiment had to live down this embarrassment. of the mutiny, at a very low point in the regimental life. 21 ringleaders, if you were, of the mutiny were sent to the dry Tortugas off Florida's coast to Fort Jefferson to think about what they did. I eventually returned to the 79th myself after I healed from the wounds, but I only read about it in the newspapers and had people tell me about this horrible disgrace that had befallen the 79th of their own making. But Scots, as I've mentioned, have always had to fight for everything they've had. For 500 years, they had to keep the English out their back door, always trying to take their land and make Scotland a satellite state. The Scots had to fight for everything they had. And these Scots felt they had to fight for their rights as soldiers. They misunderstood what it was to be a soldier. But McClellan took their colours and told them exactly what it is to be a soldier. And the colours were not returned until several months later, after the 79th once again distinguished themselves in battle. But after that rebellion, if you will, that mutiny was put down, the Scots were ready to action once again. We wanted to prove ourselves. We wanted to show we could fight as well as anybody and take orders as well as anybody. We are ready to rally round the flag. Well, we'll rally round the flag, boys, rally once again. Now in the battle cry of freedom, we'll rally from the hillsides, we'll gather from the plains. Now in the battle cry of freedom, our union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah. Down with the traitor and with the star, while we rally round the flag, boys, rally once again. Now in the battle cry of freedom. Well, we'll welcome to our numbers the loyal, true, and brave. Now in the battle cry of freedom, how though we may war, you will never be a slave. Now in the battle cry of freedom, our union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah. Down with the traitor and with the star, well, we'll rally round the flag, boys, rally once again. Now in the battle of freedom. Well, we'll answer to the call as our brothers gone before. Now in the battle of freedom, we'll tell them take in ranks with 1,000,000 freemen more. Now in the battle of freedom, our union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah. Down with the traitor and with the star, while we'll rally round the flag, boys, rally once again. Now in the battle of freedom, our union forever, hurrah, boys, hurrah. Down with the traitor and with the star, while we'll rally round the flag, boys, rally once again. Now in the battle of freedom, now in the battle of freedom, now in the battle of freedom. The battle cry of freedom, one of the great anthems of the North. I wish I could see it. I hope you're singing along if you get the opportunity. Well, after the 79th was ready for another fight, they sent us down to South Carolina, where we saw action at Pocatello, the Battle of Secessionville. And that's the one I want to focus on for a couple of reasons. There was a general, Brigadier General Benham, who was in charge of 79th and others. And he had orders not to attack Fort Lamar. But the 79th and others, we were looking for a fight, and we were willing to attack the orders if he sent us in. We didn't understand the terrain. Once again, we are in very foreign territory. I was from Paisley, Scotland, and here I am in South Carolina. And Fort Lamar is way over there, about 200 yards or so, surrounded by rifle pits and swamp and rats and snakes and alligators and God knows what else, ready to fight us in our own tracks as we're making our way to the fort to follow orders. The 8th Michigan, who was very much a kind of a companion regiment of the 79th New York, were sent in first. They were shot to absolute pieces. The 79th went in after them. We are shot to pieces too. Reinforcements never came. We were lying in our own gore until the orders came for retreat. We had to go right back across the rifle pits, right back across a horrible swamp filled with alligators and snakes. and snapping turtles and all kinds of things that bite you with their wee little teeth in the middle of the night. Made our way back to the lines. We couldn't believe what we had been through. We fought as well as its Scotsmen could fight, however, and the Charleston Mercury News said after the battle was over, thank God Lincoln had only won 79th Regiment. We didn't win, obviously, but the 79th had regained our reputation as fighting Scots. But there's another part of that story I'd like to tell you, if you'd like to hear a story. A wee drink, just a sec. There were two men of whom I'd like to tell you right now. Their name was Campbell, James and Alexander Campbell. They had immigrated to the young United States in the 1850s. They both came to Charleston, South Carolina, and they both became involved with the militias down there. The 42nd Highlanders was what the Charleston Scots were called, and James Campbell decided to stay there in Charleston, became a bit of a clerk, and his brother Alexander went north, went to New York City, became a good friend of mine. I knew all the Scots, we all knew each other. We'd all be at the bars, the pubs, late at night, singing the old songs of home, as we did on the campaign trails as well, on the battlefields and around the campfires after the battles were over. But these two particular fellows knew they were going to fight each other at the Battle of Successionville. You've heard of brother against brother, right? You've all heard of that. So the American Civil War was not too different from the American Revolution, when your fathers were fighting their sons and their brothers were fighting the brothers, divided by, especially in the American Civil War, divided by locality, by region, or by political association. Well, James and Alexander Campbell knew from newspaper reports, as well as from prisoners captured on both sides, that their regiments would be fighting each other at Secessionville. They never actually met. They wanted to, but they wrote each other after the battle was over, and they both survived, by the way. They both survived the war, by the way. They both told each other if they ever met in battle, they would be sure to do their duties to their countries. They wouldn't let their fraternal feelings for each other stand in the way of duty and country. And indeed, they didn't at the Battle of Secessionville. As I said, they never actually met, although there was a chance that they might have, but on the Union side, it was disallowed, and Alexander was not allowed to come out and meet his brother James, nor was James allowed safe passage into the Union camp. That's too much, that's too risky. We wouldn't allow that at all, but we wanted these brothers to know that they're new brothers, the men of the 79th, and I'm sure on the other side, the 42nd, were on their sides. And luckily, both men survived the day. My brother James, it seems so strange that we should meet this way. That I would wear the coat of blue, you would wear the gray. It wasn't very long ago we sang home, say dear. But now the war is raging and the battle calls us here. The battle calls us here. Now, James, I fight for liberty, I guess the same as you. But I wonder how you think it right, this country should be too. But do they say in Charleston too, to sway the hearts of men like you, to tack up arms against your brothers, sons, and friends? Your brothers, sons, and friends. And it's brother against brother. May this be the only time these memories come flooding the old lang syne. The thoughts of two lads holding hands, it's all that fills my mind. Just before the battle cry, it's a long, long way from Scotia. Will we ever see again the field where once we'd laugh and play? We all are childhood friends. We were Highland warriors,
and we battled so with pride. Only then, when we drew our wooden swords, we were on each other's side. We were on each other's side. And it's brother against brother, may this be the only time. These memories come flooding back, the old lang syne. Thoughts of two lads holding hands, it's all that fills my mind. Just before the battle cry, dreamt I shook your hand again. We met there on the plain. No longer little lads, but men sworn to our country's names. And as I turned away to go, you might have seen a tear. For we are still our mother's sons, and I love you even here. I love you even here. And it's brother against brother, may this be the only time. This memories come flooding back, the old lang syne. The thoughts of two lads holding hands, it's all that fills my mind. Just before the battle cry, may God protect you, my old friend. May we be home in a while. May we be home in a while. For it's brother against brother, may this be the only time. These memories come from of the old lang syne. The thoughts of two lads holding hands, it's all that fills my mind. Just before the battle cry, before the battle cry, before the battle cry. Well, as it turns out, James survived to 1907, and Alexander survived to 1909. And while those two fellas never met at that particular battle, the war continued to rage on, rage on, and rage on. For us, the next was the Second Battle of Bull Run. Manassas, once again, we are fighting over the same horrible ground that we fought over a year before. In fact, we saw the bleaching bones of our fallen comrades right there in the dirt in front of us as we fought over this horrible ground. And at the end of the day, you can't say that the Union won, most regrettably. We had greater casualties, 14,000 casualties. The Second Manassas was an absolute disaster. However, William Tecumseh Sherman said he had never seen regular troops that equaled the Highlanders in both soldierly bearing and appearance. So it seems the 79th did our work well once again. For us, the next engagement was the Battle of Stantilly, not long after Second Bull Run. It was a battle that, I've got to tell you, when Isaac Stevens, the new Brigadier General, was once again leading the 79th, we had a soft spot in our heart for Isaac Stevens. And when he fell, carrying our battle flag, he turned to us and he said, "Highlanders, follow me." He was shot right in the temple and he died. And at tragedy upon tragedy, his son, whom he had to run past, was dying in his own gore. He actually survived, but he was bleeding and he saw his father fall. When we retrieved the colours, and by the way, 6 colour bearers had fallen when Isaac Stevens grabbed the colours to lead us into battle. But one of them, by the way, was Alexander Campbell. He was a colour bearer for the 79th. He had fallen after the 6 had fallen, and Isaac Stevens showed what true bravery and true valour is. He left us all with a great impression.
and he died amid the cheers of victory of that day. We would later send a gift, a sword and the tattered colours, blood-soaked colours of that very battle to his widow after the war was over. And we missed that most excellent gentleman who was introduced to us just as we began to mutiny the year before. My brave laddie sleeps in a faded coat of blue, in a lonely grave unknown, as a head that beats it true. He sank pale and hungry among the famished brave, and we laid him sad and lonely within his nameless grave. No more the bugle calls the weary one. Rest, noble spirit, in thy grave unknown. We'll find you and know you among the good and true. When a robe of white is given for this faded coat of blue. He cried, give me water and just a little crumb, and my mother, she will bless you through all the years to come. And tell my dear sister, say gentle, good and true, I'll meet her up in heaven in my faded coat of blue. No more the bugle calls the weary one. Rest, noble spirit, in thy grave unknown. We'll find you and know you among the good and true. When a robe of white is given for this faded coat of blue. No gentle one was near him to close his mild blue eyes. No gentle voice was near him to give him sweet replies. No stone marks the sod, or lads say good and true. In a lonely grave he sleeps in his faded coat of blue. No more the bugle calls the weary one. Rest, noble spirit, in thy grave unknown. I'll find you and know you among the good and true. When a robe of white is given for this faded coat of blue. No more the bugle calls the weary one. Rest, noble spirit, in thy grave unknown. I'll find you and know you among the good and true. When a robe of white is given for this faded coat of blue. The faded coat of blue in honor of Brigadier General Isaac Ingalls Stevens, who died leading us to battle for the very last time at the Battle of Stantilly. Well, the next battle for us was the Battle of Southampton, September 14th, 1862, and right after that was Antietam, which was the bloodiest day in the American Civil War to that point. Now, the 79th were fighting at Burnside's Bridge, or Brig, as we'd call it back in Scotland, as well as at Sherrick's Farm. And our brothers from New York City, our Celtic brothers, the 69th, the 88th, the 63rd, they were all fighting Lee's troops on the farmlands, not far away. But the 79th absolutely held our ground, and we were fighting not to give a single bit of inch to the enemy as they tried to make their way north in this great push to the north to try to bring a war, the Civil War, the American Civil War, or as they call it in the South, the War of Northern Aggression, all the way to hopefully New York City or Pennsylvania. They were unsuccessful on that day. And Lee had to retreat south once again. And the next battle for us, well, wait, let me tell you something first here. At the Battle of Burnside's Brig, when we were under this incredible fire, we followed our orders so well that only about 40 of us were casualties of that day. And we showed what it's like to be a true healing soldier. We weren't going to give an inch. We hit us a nerve that never swerved when duty calls to arms. These noble lads in kilts and plaids, they fear not war's alarms. But on the field they ne'er would yield, but battle with the foe, and raise our glorious banner there, though blood shall freely flow. Mid clash of steel, or bugles peal, or death's relentless fight, while cannons boom and settling gloom shall veil them from our sight. But when the smoke its pall is broke, the 79th will be victorious near the stars and stripes, the emblem of the free. While Wallace sleeps, his memory keeps their courage firm and true, and Bruce, we find, is there enshrined, while all his laurels strew their path that leads to daring deeds, to glory and to fame, for freedom. For old noble Scots is still a glowing flame. And when they come, we tap a drum. When war shall cease its roar, a loving throng with festive song shall welcome and adore. And many a lass will hand a glass and sing with merry glee in praise of those who bravely fought the battles for the free. The next stop for us was Fredericksburg, December, as the winter began to set in. I have to let you understand that Fredericksburg was a lot like the battle of over the Fort of Lamar, the Battle of Secessionville. Almost insurmountable odds. Understand, if you will, if you look up this long plain, hundreds of yards long, from Fredericksburg up to Mary's Heights, you can understand Lee's cannons facing down across that plain. They were wheel hub to wheel hub to wheel hub. And somebody remarked that if Lee opened up on those cannons, not even a single chicken could survive on that plain. Nevertheless, Burnside decided he was going to try. And company by company, regiment by regiment, brigade by brigade, Burnside fed his men to those open cannon mouths. And man by man, they were shot down. Not a single man reached the cannons. But this is where we've got to give credit where credit is due. Our Celtic cousins in New York City, the men of the Irish Brigade, Fenians all, but man, they could fight. They were the ones who get closest to that wall over which those cannons were bearing down on them with thunderous lead and fire. The very next day, the dead who got closest to the wall were identified as coming for the Irish Brigade because of a little bit of boxwood sprigs that were in their caps. It was the only way we could identify them. That night, the 79th, which never actually saw action, were on the other side of the river, in the city of Fredericksburg. And we weren't allowed to have any fires because Lee would know exactly where the troops were and he would fire into where those fires were. So we were shivering, we were freezing. Many of us were wondering why we had come so far from home for this. There was a young man named David Bruce, Company B. He was about 19 years old. He had come over in 1858, 59, something like that. And he was wondering why he ever left Scotland to join this American Civil War, this great conflagration. And as the lights went down, and you could hear the groans of the men in the fields, and hear the sick and the dying not far away, he slipped into an old Scots song. And all of us who were from Scotland knew the song well. And as he sang every line, more and more Scots joined in. It's a beautiful old song that reminds us of home. Oh, run,
O Roundtree, O Roundtree, thou time, dear, take me, entwine thou art with money time away and infancy. On thy fair stem, what money names, which new name may I see? There engraved on my head, forgot they never can be. Roundtree, we sat beneath thy spreading shade, the berries early ran. They pulled thy bonny berries red, and necklaces they sprang. Amid it all, I see her still. She smiled for sports to see. We little Jane on her lap and Jane on her knee. Oh, Roundtree, 'twas there arose a fader's prayer in holy evening's calm. How sweet was then my mother's voice in the martyr's song. Now all our gay we'll meet there beneath the Roundtree. There engraved on my head, forgot they never can be. O Roundtree, Roundtree, O Roundtree. Roundtree. Well, soon enough that battle was over, and we had to march away from an awful defeat once again. From one defeat to another humiliation. This time it was the Mud March. Burnside's another great idea of his. He's trying to take Richmond. We all got stuck in the mud of Virginia. December, the January, the very next year, we didn't get very far. Well, soon enough, the 79th was sent off to the siege of Vicksburg, but we were too late for that. So they sent us to Jackson to tear up railroad lines at the Central Railroad to try to arrest any movement from the traitors to the south. And that's where we find ourselves once again in August, making our way to Tennessee. And there we would fight at Fort Sanders, which was November 29th of 1863. And it's a bit of a story. Do you want to hear another story? I've got a great story to tell you. And I've got to get ready for my next piece on the drum here. I'm going to describe for you Fort Sanders, or Fort Loudon, as it was called also. It was in Knoxville, Tennessee. And there were like less than 450 men defending Knoxville from the rebels. And we understood that Longstreet was on the march. He was going to try to take us. It was just barely an earthworks. However, we had a moat, kind of a moat, a trench, a deep trench all around Fort Sanders. And it was about 8 feet deep was the trench. But from the bottom of the trench, the top of the parapet was 15 feet. Of course, we had a plank or two at the front. And that's where Longstreet was looking through his spyglass, spying on us one day. And he saw William Zahm from Company B, along with one of our mascots named Tip, a wee dog. And they were walking on the plank.
And Longstreet said, it's just an earthwork. Look, they're walking all around the earthwork. I'm sure we can take them. Looks like there's less than 500 men. We've got 3,000 of ours. We can take them, no problem. But there was a problem. The problem was it was freezing cold, and there was a trench 8 feet deep, which Longstreet did not understand. So when he tried to take it at November 29th of that year, we saw them coming. We threw water down into the trench. They started slipping and sliding. We fired right there into the trenches. We threw shells in there, which exploded, blew them to Kingdom Come. And all the while we were fighting, we said, remember James Island, boom, boom, boom. Remember James Island, boom, boom. And that was the end of Longstreet's troops. He lost 800 men in casualties to less than 80 for the men inside the fort. 800 men to 80. We'll take those numbers any day of the week. We are very proud, those in the 79th, as our numbers were slowly diminishing. After all, we were about 120 men inside the fort at that particular time. But we are very, very proud, once again, to be in a victory led in part by the 79th, proud to be New York Volunteers. Was in the year of 76 when freemen young and old fought for independence day, each hero brave and bold. Stand the noble stars and stripes and triumph did appear, defended by great victory, the Yankee Volunteers. 'Tis my delight to march and fight like a New York Volunteer. I see the city regiments to see what they have done. The first to offer to the state to go to Washington. Protect the noble stars and stripes, the flag they love so dear. They've done their duty nobly, just like Yankee Volunteers. 'Tis my delight they march and fight like a New York Volunteer. The rebels into Maryland, they madly raved and swore. They would not let our Union troops pass through to Baltimore. The Massachusetts regiment, no traitors did they fear. They've done their duty nobly, just like Yankee Volunteers. They fought their way to Washington like New York Volunteers. 'Twas in the year of 76 when freemen young and old fought for independence, did each hero brave and bold. 'Twas then the noble stars and stripes and triumph did appear, defended by great victory, the Yankee Volunteer. It's mighty like they march and fight like a New York Volunteer. It's mighty like they march and fight like a New York Volunteer. It's mighty like they march and fight like a New York Volunteer. The New York Volunteer, a great song to which we would march and to which we would sing.
Hey, Charlie.
Sir?
Sorry, forgive my interruption, but we're really running out of time. And your enthusiasm has just overtaken the program, which is phenomenal.
Well, I'll finish up with a couple of wee bits then. Is that okay?
All right, you got about 3 minutes?
3 minutes.
Can you do it, lad?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I don't want to run over time. Forgive me for when you've come so far, you forget what time it is, right? Well, the Battle of Stantilly was not much longer after that. And it was one more time for the 79th to show their mettle once again. We returned after our 3 years was up, right after the Battle of Spotsylvania, as at that time when I, Captain Lang, was promoted to Colonel. And we all returned home to great fanfare and welcome. And as the years rolled on, the 79th became once again a state militia and was disbanded in 1876. And we would meet in the various taverns in Toon and at Mercer House, and we'd always end up our evenings as I'd like to end up here. And I wish you all a great rest of your evening. Thank you, Jim. Thank you to the Legacy Foundation. And every night, when the old veterans of the 79th would return home, we would sing, "Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be
forgot and old lang syne. For old lang syne, but Joe, for old lang syne, we'll tap a cup of kindness in for old lang syne. So here's the hand, my trusty field. Here's a hand of mine. We'll tap a right good merry walk for old lang syne. For old lang syne, but Joe, for old lang syne, we'll tap a right good merry walk for old lang syne. And as the years rolled on and the veterans' parades were filled by fewer and fewer veterans, I watched New York City become as modern as any city. And I myself died in 1905, buried in Greenwood Cemetery. But I hope for the last little while you've understood the sacrifices made by Scots Americans serving in the 79th New York Volunteers. And I hope to see you all again very, very soon. And maybe we can sing this song together at that time. For old lang syne. For old lang syne, Joe. For old lang syne. We'll tap a cup of kindness in. For old lang syne. Long live the Union.
What a great sentiment to end with, Charlie. Thank you so very, very much. I haven't enjoyed a program like that in a long time. We should do music more often with you, Charlie. And for those members watching or non-members, Charlie has been a steady performer at our Lincoln Day programs in the old cafe afterwards. So you can see Charlie at the League at least once a year, maybe even more. Who knows? Charlie, thank you an awful lot for what a great program.
My pleasure, Jim. Sorry I ran over time. I get all caught up in the stories.
Charlie, I was enjoying every minute of it, so don't worry about it.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Charlie. All right. Now I got to do some public announcements, so forgive me, Charlie. But all right, off we go.
No problem.
Thanks
Bye,
again.
everybody.
All right.
Okay.
Stay well. All right, folks.
You too.
Upcoming programs. May 13th, Library Hour. Cordelia Biddle. Hope you recognize that name. It's an old Philadelphia name. And she will talk about her new book called Nicholas Biddle, Unlikely Prophet. And in case you're wondering, Nicholas Biddle was the president of the Second Bank of the United States when President Andrew Jackson, refused to renew the charter. So it was Tsar Nicholas versus, the King Andrew. So it will be a great program. All right. May 17th, Public Affairs. Susan Brady, Dr. Susan Brady, MD, President of the American Medical Association, will talk in a panel discussion with other league members, including Ed Terzansky, right, from Jefferson Healthcare, on the future of COVID-19, because it has a future, whether we like it or not. And that'll be a wonderful program as well. And then on May the 26th, our next Civil War Roundtable will feature Dr. Robert Hicks, who is just one of the best guys out there in the Civil War Roundtable world. And he will talk about the Confederate vaccination crisis in the Civil War, because yes, they needed vaccinations back then. So thank you all for joining us this evening. I hope you enjoyed it. Great music, and thank you, Charlie, again. So to all of you, stay well, stay safe, and hopefully we'll see you in just the next few weeks. So thanks for joining us, and good night on behalf of the Union League Legacy Foundation. Bye now.